Hi, this is Satya Natarajan. From automation experiments to game-changing operations, the future of intelligent work. Welcome to the podcast. Today we have Varun Srinivasa Murthy, a visionary technology leading and specializing in AI, robotic process automation, and intelligent automation at scale. Varun leads automation centers of excellence and is recognized as a thought leader on transforming organization through intelligent automation. What makes Varun's perspective unique is his focus on moving automation from a promising experiment to a game-changing operational tool that drives real business value. We'll explore how organizations scale automation, the convergence of AI and RPA, and the manufacturing transformation and the future work in an automated world. Varun, welcome.
Thank you, Satya. Thanks for the warm introduction.
Varun, many organizations have successful automation pilots, but for some reason they struggle to scale them across the enterprise. You talk about moving from a promising experiment to a game-changing operational tool. So what's in your view is the gap, and why do pilots fail to become production systems?
So I think one of the way people look at automations, right? I think there are, again, to begin with, this is my views. I'm not looking around our employer views in order to share. In my personal viewpoint, I think a lot of companies look around task automation as an automation when they begin their journey, right? And they are looking around, okay, let me do some task and send an email, okay, email automation, right? I'm doing some actions on the system, let's say to take an action is kind of task automation. And that is where a lot of the pilot revolve around. And they look at simpler use case in order to solve as a pilot. But when you go into, as an organization, the complexity grew when you start looking around business process itself, right? Because business process in and out of itself has a lot of variations that the users are doing, which an automation team or any excellence team is not aware to begin with, right? And then thinking about the complexities that are built around that. And also I feel the organization readiness in terms of, do they provide enough time in order to look at certain initial, experimentations that went into live into the production, enough time in order to nurture and mature and figure out what is the right ecosystem, right operating model for organization to utilize and scale, right? And this requires a lot of patience, I would say, and also require a lot of clarity in terms of what the overall goal going to look like as well. And business process itself is a complex thing because many people does things much differently, and try to bring them all together is also, and a statement that really helps in order to redefine how we can scale in a larger enterprises and larger scale automations, right? I think that business process sanity and the right operating model is what is required, and where people fail is around to define both of that and then start their journey. I think that is one of the major reason I feel as a failure in there. In order to take it notch up, I would say is around figure out your operating model, think about where automation fits, what group it fits in, what could be the right strategy, how are the business process defined, what is our strategy to automate the business process, where exactly automation makes sense, what's an ROI, where do we say no to automation even though it might seem obvious use case, but there is no proper ROI, there is no stability in the business process. I think considering all of that factor really helps to define the success criteria for an organization.
That's well said, Varun. This we typically call them as an automation paradox, right? From a task automation, not having proper oversight about the business processes as a whole, and then getting the project teams to envisage from a business point of view, and then preparing them to be ready. Very great insights on that. We have pretty much seen the RPA sorts of automation, and we also hear the new kid on the block, I would say a pretty old AI. So we call them the convergence of AI and RPA, the intelligent way of automating the future. There's a lot of talk about AI and RPA trying to achieve what we call as intelligent automation. What does this convergence actually mean, and how is it any different from the traditional RPA or AI which we see as a separate or alone?
So one way to viewpoint on this convergence is around, the way I would like to think is around, AI is like your brain, right? It can make decisions for you. RPA is like moving your arms and doing any actions, right? Every decision, when it comes down to, I want to lift a water bottle, right? Make a perfect decision, make, activity, where the thinking happens in the brain. That is more like in AI, right? In the past, I think the data systems and the data sanity and the data convergence and the metadata and the data engineering itself, right, which drives this decision were evolved. And what RPA came into the picture is around, I know this as a fixed path or a deterministic outcome that can I expect. Can I use RPA to perform this activity, right? And that is where the RPA was. Now with AI system, large language model becoming much and much easier and also available for the largest set of people, and the data availability has evolved over a period of time, I would say is around the AI system has evolved itself, right? And where we look at RPA, we are looking around taking a business process and automating it, right? Now the business process itself is becoming more intelligent now because of AI involvement in those business processes there in the past. Now, in my view, this convergence happening at business process level is also happening at a technology layer. Is around, can I build a traditional method of doing an OCR in order to read a PDF? Or can I ask an LLM in order to give me an output? And that is, for me, is one API away when I start using LLM. But building a model is multi-steps away, and the accuracy might not be even guaranteed then, right? I think those areas where it process becoming intelligent, there are technologies that has evolved and become intelligent, which were traditionally part of an RPA, right? I think that stitch of solution is becoming more intelligent, and the decision making from a deterministic way of doing it, the dynamic decision making, which is what the real world scenario looks like, right? Because no one opens the PPT and goes through a flowchart that I am approving or doing this activity because flowchart tells me to do that, right? Because people think and make decision, and the level of decision involved, the variability varies according to process and the maturity of the process. I think that is also where AI will augment for RPA, where it's going to bring across, right? And the third aspect I believe is when we talk about return on investment on AI or RPA or APA, the new terminology and all of that, or intelligent automation, it always comes down to what actionable outcome that we can define, right? And actionable outcome for AI, one of the wink for AI to do an actionable outcome is through RPA. And for RPA, for it to become more adoptable across the enterprise, has to become more intelligent. I think those two converging and the business process becoming more intelligent, I think is a good segue for all of this to become more intelligent in the future. And business wants to be more intelligent, your automation has to become intelligent. And the availability of AI services through large language models, in a simpler words, right? Making life easier for automation engineers, just one API away.
So the intelligent automation doesn't start all about how intelligent you automate. You have the rule-based and the learning-based, and then the the intelligence at the business process layer itself getting matured with the advent of LLMs and stuff is what makes it more intelligent. So it's a convergence of three different opportunities, one with the rule based, one with the learning based, and also the maturity of the process by itself. That's a good way to kind of visualize that. Thanks for that. Now we will just move from the brains and the automate part of work to something what we hear as the agentic AI, and they call them as the next frontier. You specialize in agentic AI frameworks. For our listeners who may not be familiar, what is the agentic AI and how is it different from traditional AI, and why should organizations care? Could you unwrap it for us?
Agentic AI, I think, is a mystery for everyone, right? I think there are different ways people define agentic systems, agentic process automation, traditional AI, and so on. My simpler way of looking at things is around agentic AI or agentic automation, or the convergence of both across, has three major parts to it. You have knowledge, you have capacity, you have intelligence, and then you have action, right? Traditional AI, for example, if you are doing any predictive analysis or anything, had less action, more insights to the system. Now, agentic system provide insights and also take an action on. But a simple way to look around is, if I am building a traditional AI algorithm to book a cab as a third-party solution from my home to my office, a traditional AI look at all the data and tell me maybe what is a good time in order to book a cab. And if I book at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock, what would be the traffic across the route and which time would be most favorable for me to go there. Agentic system tells me without even telling all of this and says that 8 o'clock is the best time to go. Looking at all your calendar, looking at all your schedule, you might have to start at 7:15, even though 8 o'clock is the best possible route to go, because the access to the knowledge across all the different systems is much more. The agentic automation, in my view, is around 7:15 you have to leave because of XYZ factor, and let me book a cab for you, and if you use this and a service provider, this is the cheapest what you can get. Or if you book this is the most comfortable business ride you will get. If you can book this if it is a personal ride and so on. And I think the way the system accesses information, availability of information, and how the system runs in the background is a game changer. And now you can call this as agents because each one of them are specialized as doing a particular task at much higher degree of variability and also higher degree of coherence, because of which you have agents. Now, these agents is, in my view, are like a virtual employees that can talk to each other, that can work each other, share information, and takes care or talks to that agent when that agent is specialized at certain thing. Some can be specialized in reading a schedule. Some might be specialized in doing the algorithm. Some might be specialized in booking cabs. Some might be specialized in pricing data and so on, right? So all of this can come together in order to work. Now, each of this agent could be a traditional AI agent similar to the past, or it could be an LLM solution, or it could be a robot which does predetermined actions in there. I think this ecosystem, in my view, is a good agentic system as a good representation. I can go deep dive in technical, but I think it will not help the audience in a larger context. But this is how I think is a good way to visualize things. I think agentic system is a natural evolution from the traditional system, which provide more autonomy to the user, and a lot of decision making can happen in the back.
So from a knowledge to an intelligence that is uncovered and that has been learned on the fly, and then an action or a decision is taken to direct it towards an action, and each agent specializes in certain sort of decision making as well as action, and that completes the entire intelligence, what we traditional booking through an Ola or an Uber, and how this can fit in. Thanks for that specific examples as well. Now, from the generic examples that we have also seen the AI from the manufacturing angle as well as the supply chain and how it's getting transformed, right? We have so many stories of automation that's transforming manufacturing and supply chains. Now, how can organizations use AI and automation to improve factory operations, supply chain efficiencies, and overall operational excellence? Could you walk us through some examples? Need not be specific with your company, but in general.
So when we look around manufacturing as a whole and supply chain as a whole, right? I think the complexity, if you take, for example, supply chain, are very different, right? There is decision that is very dynamic in nature, not driven by it of your policy. It could also be geopolitical situations. It is also be a market situation. It could be an investor situation. It could be a segment situation. It could be trade wars, tariff wars, whatnot, right? So in supply chain, when you want to procure something, all this geopolitical situation and political stability and also maturity of organizations you deal with also vary, right? I think, and then that there is a contract, right? Other things that also comes into that. I think a lot of this, in my view, is well suited for AI because you're dealing with a lot of decisions and a lot of variables there, which are unknown to you, unknown to your company, but might be known to in a knowledge basis, might be known into the systems that already has this information, which can help you to fast track and speed track your decision making processes. I think that is where AI in supply chain is a big thing in my view, right? Because it makes a lot of decision much faster, much easier, right? The ability of human in order to absorb that information, traditionalizing it, come through their biases of what worked in the past and what not, and to bring onto that table, and moment they are ready to present and take an action, the things would change drastically in the background if the system is very dynamic in nature, right? So I think that is where I think a lot of focus is around AI on supply chain, right? I think even in terms of contractual data between the two people, right? You have a vendor partner and you are procuring the parts from there, there's a contract. Now, if I deal with China, there's one. If I deal with Singapore, there are many. If I deal with Japan, there are many. If I deal with Pakistan, there are many. If I deal with Sri Lanka, there are many, right? Each country work with who we work with, the agreement, the terms and conditions, the fair trade between the two countries, the level of you control you have, the supplier ecosystem there, and the cross. I think there are a lot of those variability. I think AI plays a very good role in that. I think in simple as contractual agreements and so on, right? Automation plays a very important role when you make decision out of all this dynamic outcomes. You will start seeing a definitive path that you can take. Right now, I want to, with all of this, I identify this is a great supplier and what to do with. I want to get a quote from a supplier, or I want to create a purchase order with a supplier, or I want to order certain things in there. I want to communicate to them and see what's the interest they are, right? I think a lot of those automation can take over, and your virtual agents or your agentic ecosystem can act autonomously in order to do certain things in place. That will reduce your stress within your supply chain or ecosystem, that will make it more intelligent and more scalable for your future, right? And in terms of manufacturing, I think there are two things I would say is around. One is how you can use AI in order to make your product more efficient, more better for your customers who consumes that product. And then you can start using AI in order to have less compliance issues, right? In terms of how can I improve my safety? How can I improve my sustainability index? How can I improve my overall livelihood or employee morale of my manufacturing employees who work on the manufacturing floors, right? I think you can look at in all those angles, right? I think in terms of manufacturing line itself become intelligent, I think there are a lot of great use cases that have really evolved over a period of time. I think other aspect in terms of safety, protection and so on, I was looking to one of my friend who was building a system where in the CCTV they can capture through an AI algorithms all the safety hazards that can happen in the manufacturing floor, how the preventive system can adopt and try to avoid that, right? I think those kind of systems are evolving. I think that plays a very important role in manufacturing becomes safer, better, and also product becoming more intelligent as we move ahead as well. I think that those are my 2 cents there.
Yep, that's a great way to explain when there are so many variables, and improving an efficiency is not just a fixed set of constraints. The constraints also keeps changing, and the AI has to learn as well as streamline the operation and also make sure the product, which is not in isolation, particularly with the supply chains, the disruptions that is happening, how AI is hand in hand working with automation will be the factory of the future. That's a different way to look at the other constraints beyond manufacturing, like sustainability and so on and so forth. Thanks for hovering over that. Now, I also kind of heard that you led the automation center of excellence in a context of not just automating, not just taking advantage of the new technology, but how do you build in a center of excellence, and what does actually a center of excellence do? And how does it help organizations scale automation and drive organizational transformation?
So I think, in my view, the first step in order to build a center of excellence is to look around, defining what is that outcome or a goal you want to achieve, right? And what kind of knowledge and education, experience you need to have, along with the skills in order to do that, right? I think if I'm looking around just an automation engineer to come in and automate certain things, then I'm losing on how do he understand or he or she understand requirement, because they are good developers, they might be good at understanding requirement from the people who does not understand technology, right? How can they architect the solution that can scale across the enterprise? How they can look at security as a standpoint, how they can look infrastructure as a standpoint, right? I think when we are trying to build that center of excellence, when we start looking around, I think a lot of these questions is the first thing we need to start answering. Because what I have seen is most people build center of excellence with developers and start eventually going down in the different route altogether when they are trying to scale up, because not necessarily all the skill sets that is required you will not find in a person, right? I think that is where you need to start looking around what are the different objectives of Center of Excellence and where it is placed in the company, whether it is in IT, whether it is in business, whether it's in profit center, whether it's in cost center. All of those, I think, help you to kind of define that. The second partner is around how do you have change champions outside the COE who can talk about COE so that you have that business coming into the COE, I think is the second factor. And the third factor is how do you differentiate different skill set, provide specific education to those different profiles in there, and how do you grow and scale up and organize a harmony of groups that start working together and coming together. I think it's a third aspect in my view. When we are looking around, automation in general, I think understanding and hand in hand with business is very critical, because that is where you understand business challenges, problems, variation, process, and translating back. When you are looking around adding more intelligence and AI, you also start looking around data along with business problem and how well your data pipelines are and data structures are and the metadata is available in order to do that. I think it's a combination of all these factors that comes together in order to make a good COE.
So it is not just beyond a project mindset to looking at different capabilities in the context of the organization and, developing champions beyond the traditional IT, software development and business in isolation. So building automation centers of excellence is beyond just a programming exercise. Yeah. So we'll slightly move towards while building automation, taking advantage of AI and then building capabilities. Technology is just only a part of the equation, right? You had emphasized empathetic technology leadership and organizational readiness during that journey. Why is this so critical, and how do you ensure organization are even ready for the automation?
I think this is a multivariable problem, but in a simpler terms, whether you automate or not automate, right? You always work with people, right? And you need to have human to human relation established before you have robot to human relation start establishing between the teams, right? I think the first aspect. I think the second aspect is, I think whenever we talk about automation and AI, right? People always consider that if we help them to automate this, we'll lose our job because that's an outcome, right? But not necessarily all the time, right? And in many cases, what I've seen, it has worked opposite, right? Where people have got time back to them, where they have utilized to do certain more creative stuff and went on to become much better at their job and got good promotions within the organization and so on. I think that is where having that honest conversation with your customer or a stakeholder or people who are automating, having that empathic conversation, having that conversation in terms of what is that it looks like, what's the end goal could look like, what is an impact going to look like, what is beyond this, right? Understanding and looking from their shoes becomes much more important. And also availability of their time in order to automate, to provide you all the walkthrough might not be perfect, right? Understand that. I think if we start working through a lot of imperfections, I think you start building a system which is much, much more perfect. And that is where I think this human relations plays a very key role, in my view, in order to identify good automation use case, sustain an automation use case, build a center of excellence, and manage it across in terms of scalability and through the launch years to come. I think if we don't have that human to human interaction, you will never be able to set the bot to human interaction, which is what down the line what you want to build, right, through the automation centers.
Sure. So beyond preparing the leadership for the fear of missing out, FOMO, we need to empathize from the shoes of the stakeholder who's actually, are they ready for the change by themselves and overcoming their resistance and barrier. So it's a sort of make a bond, more than make a bond with the technology, make a bond with the people who are ready to change. That's kind of universal, I feel, with every change management exercise, be it AI or non-AI. But here the fear of missing out because of automation or the loss of job is even more perceived, amplified, right? So it's a change management exercise, but of a different, amplification is what I would conclude and agree with you. So now from the entire chain of robotic process automation, using advantage of AI, creating center of excellence by building capabilities and preparing the right canvas with people for change management. When the pilot actually goes to form an impact. How do you measure success? How do organizations measure the success of automation initiatives? What metrics would matter to them? How do you ensure that automation delivers real business value?
I think end of the day, any outcome in an organization or an enterprise comes down to two factors. One is, am I saving any money to the organization, or we are saving time to the people, right? I think the third aspect I would also add on from those two is the employee who is overworked. Am I giving time back to them so that they can spend time with their family more? I think that's another dimensions I can add on to, right? I think the three dimensions that will definitely help, right? And when we look about in terms of money as an indication, then I think the factors or a KPI is like how many transactions that an automation is processing per hour, per day, or per year, given quarter, and how is that transaction growth is translating without increasing my license and the robot cost, right, in the longer scheme of things, right? I think that is one aspect. And the best way to look at is what is my cost per hour I'm spending for a given business process to keep a robot active, and what is the value it is able to generate, or how many transactions to do. And if I want to do that with the same human workforce, the same type of transaction and same type of value analysis, what is that outcome I can expect or define, right? And what would be cost for me to do that? And if it is in a low cost region, high cost region, what is that variability, how it varies across the spectrum? I think that is one in my view. The second aspect in terms of time, I think again it becomes a function specific, team specific, and a company specific also. And if you take a typical production support kind of scenario, you talk about mean time to resolve. How can my mean time to resolve reduce by automation? Can I measure that? If you're automating in order to reduce the incidents that are coming in, or customer tickets or user stories, you're trying to reduce that. You can think about how much is automated, how much is manual, and what is a trend that is going across, right, once you start scaling up. I think those kind of things, and this becomes more of a team specific or goal specific, that what you are looking for, right? And we talked about supply chain in terms of contract and POs and things like that we are achieving. We can think about how many of that can be done, right? How many safety concerns are identified through an intelligent system, which goes unnoticed in the past, right? I think some parameters specific to situation teams can be defined. I think the third aspect in terms of giving back time to the employee, so that I think to avoid the burnout, I think that is more of a feedback in and out, right? I think you ask for a feedback initially, understand automating certain aspects of their work. How is that they feel now, provided they have certain time in place? I think it's more of a satisfaction and employee feedback conversations that kind of enable that, right? I think in terms of it, situationally measure as define specific KPIs and try to measure. Otherwise, I think cost per hour per robot provided, the total cost of ownership versus how many transactions is processed versus how much would cost me at specific region in order to augment that capacity with human. I think that equations really KPIs will define that. And while we are setting up COI, I think the day one first bot that you are building or first intelligent system you are building, have that thought process so that you know how to capture that data, how to maintain that, how to capture it as part of your requirement itself, and how you can sustain over a period of time, right? I think that mindset, having it from a day one, it will help not have, you will not be in a position to figure out at scale when someone asks you that question.
So it's well said. I could almost correlate. It's not just the cost, and it's not just the efficiency of the process that we are trying to automate, scale by the number of transactions and so on, but also intangible benefits like giving back time to the person from where the automation begins is a well said example. And definitely, as one of the underlying points that you mentioned was that it cannot be the same for every department or every function, that there is a subjectivity to how do you measure the same cost versus efficiency. Well said again. So we would move to a little bit philosophical topic with the advent of Industry 4.0 transition to 5.0. Everybody right now is not talking about automation or AI in an absolute sense. They are putting people in the center and then the rest of the things. As automation and AI advance, how will the work revolve, particularly in the Industry 5.0 context? And what would be your vision for the future of the work and how organizations and workers prepare towards it?
I think in my view, AI and automation will evolve, right? I think 4.0, 5.0, maybe 6.4 in the future, something around that. I think things will change. I think this technology is here to stay for a very long time, and it might evolve like similar to any other technology. I think the speed it is evolving is what astonishing versus the evolution of the technology itself, right? And I think that is where the mindset shift really needs to happen, and this is where the change management comes into the picture. I think the change at organization level of thinking, organization itself thinking that. I think the change at individual level, start thinking around that, because it is not good to have, it's nice to have, it is must have. And that is where the industry is driving, and that is where 5.0 will drive us as well. In the must have situation, to have policies, governance, standard, change champions, mindset, and acceptance to accept this new reality is there or not is a bigger question. I think as we start asking those questions to ourselves within the company, within the COEs, within the larger context, within the region or a country, I think things start looking at things much differently. I think the second aspect in terms of it is the skill gap, right? I think you have a lot of workforce across the company, across the organization, across the country, wherein who was not equipped with this, who are very skeptical, who are afraid of this change. Now, how do you convince them, make them comfortable, may help them to learn, help them to adopt to it, and then they can help you to scale, right? I think those things are definitely coming. And in my view, I think in a more philosophical sense, if I want to answer it, it's more about rediscovering ourselves of who we are. Now that these new parameters are coming, and how can I use these parameters to redefine who I am in the future, and think about who I am. Will it fit to the company? Will it fit to the country? Will it fit to the organization? Whatever, right? I think that sense of rethinking is what I think each and everyone has to go through. People work at different pace. Every clock, runs at different speeds. We really have to rethink, reimagine. The faster we do, better we are equipped for the future. The slower we do, we properly are catching up after certain people have done that activity. That is how I pretty much look around that. But these are must things to have, in my view, as the industry evolves and landscape change for a period of time.
So the future of work and the work by itself is here to stay. Humans and machines will be the norm, and the collaboration and relationship, the sooner the better, because the world is moving at a faster pace. And on the way, trying to kind of minimize the apprehensions and making sure the skill is the activator towards getting that relationship much closer and moving faster will decide how the organizations or the COEs are actually going towards that ideal next frontier where human and machines are working together. Varun, thank you for sharing your insights on intelligent automation, agentic AI, and the future of work. For our listeners, you can connect with Varun on LinkedIn to follow his perspective on automation, AI, and organizational transformation. The automation revolution is underway, and the organizations that move from pilots to scaled impact will lead their industries. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Satya. Thanks for moderating, and you had a very nice conclusion to every question. I think that was super awesome. Thank you.